I'm wondering if you could comment on this, but I think the timing of the invasion was interesting that it's like it happened right after the Olympics. Was that a coincidence, or, maybe Putin was watching the games and
he got really upset that Russian figure skater got disqualified, and that's what put him over the edge.
But the straw that broke the camel's
Couldn't
back.
have the gold, so he decided to take Ukraine instead.
Consolation prize.
That may be true, but let me remind you, again, sort of historically, that the Russians have used, and also the Soviets, have used the Olympics repeatedly as a means or as a timeline for conducting operations. The first one was 1980, and we boycotted them because they went into Afghanistan. The second time was in 2008. I think it was the I forget which Olympic one. It was Sochi. No, Sochi was Georgia. And then there was the third Olympics. Oh, the Beijing Olympics, when they took Crimea. And this will be the fourth. So I guess looks like a pattern to me.
So I think the only thing we can do is stop having Olympics.
I don't mind that idea.
Great idea, Shelley.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me a third time. Wonder what's on Eurovision.
What about fourth time?
I gotta get off social media. Well, here's something else that people have been mentioning. I don't know if this is connected. I'd like to hear your thoughts, but there have been, let's call them some sketchy dealings in both Ukraine and China with President Biden's son, Hunter Biden. How do you think that affects anything that's happening today?
So I don't think it's a good thing that we have a president that has had or will have financial connections with our competitor. I've read some articles that I think are very clear about sort of the similarity. During the time of the Cold War, if there was a U.S. president, senator, congressman, anybody in politics who had financial dealings with the communist Russia or Soviet Union, they wouldn't have been elected in the first place.
Well, Bernie Sanders had a honeymoon in the Soviet Union.
Oh, but he was just admiring the scenery.
This is true. You're right. But I think at the time, I don't have an excuse for that. But I'm just saying in general, I don't know of very many politicians that can show financial any kind of connection with Ukraine or with China. And so I think that I think even Michael Bloomberg pulled out of the elections this last time around when some people started pulling back the curtain to see how much investments and how much money he had involved with China. And then he withdrew. I don't know if that's the reason he withdrew, but certainly it started coming out during his campaign. And I think there were several people who said he was the most China-friendly candidate among the competitors.
Well, it's a good thing the DOJ decided to not let anyone talk about the Hunter Biden stuff until after the election was over?
Well, I mean, I think there's bigger than the Hunter Biden himself is the issue that there isn't, because you brought up the idea that during the Cold War, it wouldn't have been okay for U.S. officials to have financial ties with the Soviet Union. But there's just this, we don't want to recognize that things are as serious as they are with China right now. Like, we're not looking at this as a Cold War. When people start talking about a Cold War, the Chinese Communist Party starts kicking up a fuss, and then, we back down, or, our government officials don't want to use that term. So I think there's a fundamental difference there where we do not almost want to recognize what's happening.
Right. I mean, we didn't have, we didn't have a Pearl Harbor event yet with with the PRC. The PLA hasn't taken out something that we can connect to directly and claim that they've attacked us, and then now we're going to work to defeat them. What they're doing is, the good example is, of course, the frog in the pan, where the water is slowly heating up and the frog thinks it's very nice. And oh, isn't it nice that the water's warm? It's like a sauna bath. And then eventually, before the frog figures out what the problem is, it's dead in the water. I think that's the methodology that the CCP is using. They're using they're doing things that are just below a kinetic attack. They're doing things like stealing our technology. They're doing things like increasing their economic power. They're using their economic power. They're conducting, legal warfare or lawfare in the South China Sea. They're using diplomatic warfare. They're denying Taiwan the ability to operate in the UN. They're doing all these things that are just not enough to make us feel like we're at war. And so we're being cooked slowly.
Well, so in the case of Taiwan, since you've mentioned they've not brought things to the kinetic level yet. What are their courses of action to take Taiwan from, this kind of salami slicing that they've been doing to actual kinetic invasion?
Okay, so just to make sure I didn't misspeak, they have tried to take Taiwan several times. First of all, the civil war that was happening in China from 1927 until 1949, when the Chiang Kai-shek and his forces withdrew to Taiwan, that was the first kinetic event. Then there was the Taiwan Strait crises that happened three of them that happened over the last couple of decades. So now, what are they doing in terms of preparing for that? Well, first of all, what they claim is that they would prefer to take Taiwan peacefully. In other words, they would, in their dreams, they would imagine that the people of Taiwan would vote to become a part of the PRC. That's their dream, right? But their dream is not becoming a reality over time, because it looks like the Taiwanese are obviously seeing what's happening in Hong Kong. They're seeing what's happening with people who are arguing for democratic rights inside of China. They see the discrimination against religion. They just see what's happening in East Turkestan, otherwise known as Xinjiang. They see that China, that the PRC is not a place that they would like to end up being under. So some of the actions that the PRC or the CCP is doing is actually strengthening Taiwan. Their takeover of Hong Kong, for example, that was probably a very important event for the Taiwanese, because it helped crystallize what the future would look like under the CCP. But other actions that the CCP are taking are, for example, they're encouraging Taiwanese businessmen to set up businesses in the mainland. They're offering lucrative jobs to young professionals to recruit them to do whatever it is, technology work. They're attacking them in every dimension, except they're not really doing the kinetic part yet. I mean, some of the kinetic part they're doing is, let's say, the jets that are flying in the air defense identification zone off of Taiwan, both the north of Taiwan and the south of Taiwan, and they're doing that over and over again. That's a military type activity. The PLA have destroyed two of their own satellites in the last couple of decades. The Russians did one recently, but they're doing things kinetically to practice for the day when they decide to do it kinetically. And they're training their military to do amphibious operations with the Russians. In fact, they've trained several times. One of the points that I think Captain Fennell mentioned, and I would want to highlight in a previous interview you did, many people think that the PLA is not combat ready. And, the last time they did an actual real fight was 1979. But, when you train with the Russians, who have got a lot of combat experience, that training is pretty good, and it can make up for the lack of what critics say that the PLA is weak and they don't know how to fight and all this. But training with an army a Navy and an Air Force that have done combat operations and are continuing to do combat operations, whether it's in Syria, in Ukraine, or internally in Russia, that's pretty good training. And so they're doing it in all dimensions. And there isn't one area where they're not trying to take over Taiwan. Even ideologically, they're constantly fighting the notion that democracy is good. They claim that they're a democratic nation, for example. All this propaganda. So the CCP is doing everything it can without actually invading Taiwan,